What if everything you thought you knew about warrior women was only half the story? For thousands of years, one name has echoed through history, myth, and popular imagination: the Amazons. These legendary fighters have been depicted as everything from savage barbarians to noble heroines. But who were they really? We're about to embark on a journey deep into the heart of one of antiquity's most compelling mysteries. From the battlefields described in Homer's Iliad to the recent archaeological discoveries that are rewriting history books, the true story of the Amazons is more fascinating and more real than most people realize. This isn't just a tale of ancient warriors. It's a story that challenges our deepest assumptions about power, gender, and what it means to be strong. Think about the images that come to mind when you hear the word Amazon. Perhaps you picture a fierce woman with a bow, riding bareback into battle, defying the expectations of her time. That image didn't come from nowhere. It was born from a blend of history, fear, admiration, and mythology, a mixture so potent that it has endured for millennia. But behind the legends lie real women whose lives and choices unsettled the ancient world and continue to resonate today. Why does the idea of the Amazons still capture our imagination? What is it about their story that feels both ancient and urgently modern? In this video, we'll peel back the layers of myth to uncover the historical truths about these formidable women. We'll explore how they were perceived by the Greeks, why their legacy was alternately feared and celebrated, and how new evidence is bringing us closer than ever to understanding who they really were. This is more than just a history lesson. It's an exploration of how stories shape our understanding of the past and present. So settle in and open your mind. You're about to discover the Amazons not as fantasy, but as a powerful part of human history whose echoes can still be felt today. To understand the Amazons, we must first journey into the world of the ancient Greeks, for it was their stories that gave these warrior women a name and a legend. In the epic poems of Homer, like the Iliad, the Amazons are not just mentioned in passing. They are formidable adversaries called the equal of men. They were placed by Greek writers in the vast, unknown territories beyond their civilized world in the wild steppes of Scythia or the rugged frontiers of Anatolia. This was a deliberate choice. For the Greeks, these distant lands were realms of mystery and danger, the perfect setting for a society that completely inverted their own. Greek life was built on a clear hierarchy, with men in the public sphere and women largely confined to the home. The very idea of a society composed entirely of women, who were master archers and riders, who governed themselves and engaged in war, was both terrifying and fascinating. It held up a mirror to Greek society, asking uncomfortable questions about the nature of power and the roles assigned to each gender. The legend, therefore, was far more than a simple adventure tale. It was a cultural projection, a way for the Greeks to explore their own anxieties about the world outside and the order within. But where did this powerful myth truly begin? For a long time, modern scholars dismissed the Amazons as pure fantasy, a symbolic construct with no basis in reality. However, archaeology has begun to forcefully challenge that view, providing a startling historical foundation for these tales. In the vast Eurasian steppes, a region the Greeks called Scythia, archaeologists have unearthed thousands of burial mounds known as kurgans. Within them, they made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the historical community. A significant number of graves containing female skeletons were also filled with weapons. We're not just talking about a single dagger for protection. These women were buried with full arsenals, quivers packed with arrows, iron swords, spears, and even armor. Perhaps most tellingly, many were found with injuries consistent with combat, arrowheads embedded in bone, and skulls fractured by battle axes. These were not ceremonial send-offs for priestesses. These were the graves of warriors. This evidence points directly to the nomadic tribes of the Scythians and their neighbors, the Sarmatians. In these cultures, life on the open steppe was harsh and required every member of the community to be able to defend themselves and their herds. The distinction between male and female roles appears to have been far less rigid than in the settled agricultural societies of Greece. For a nomadic woman, skill in riding and archery wasn't a rebellion against her society. It was a necessity for its survival. The Greeks, encountering these formidable horse archers on the edges of their known world, would have been utterly astonished. They saw women performing with deadly skill in a domain the Greeks reserved exclusively for men. The stories they brought back home would have been exaggerated and mythologized over countless retellings, transforming these real, skilled women into the legendary Amazons, a tribe that lived entirely without men. The kernel of truth was there, but it was filtered through a lens of cultural shock and narrative flair, blossoming into one of the most enduring legends of all time. So deeply were the Amazons woven into the fabric of Greek thought that they transcended mere myth to become a powerful cultural symbol. Their imagined society stood in direct opposition to everything the Greek polis represented. Where Greek women lived under the guardianship of men, confined largely to the domestic sphere, the Amazons were autonomous, self-governing, and masters of the public domain of war. This inversion was both terrifying and irresistible to the Greek psyche. They became the ultimate other, a cautionary tale used to reinforce their own social order. By depicting these powerful women as ultimately being defeated by Greek heroes, the culture could safely explore the anxiety of female power while reassuring itself of masculine superiority. It was a narrative that said, yes, such women could exist, but our way of life will always triumph. This ideological battle was fought not in scrolls alone, but on the surfaces of countless everyday objects. Greek art, particularly the vivid red and black figure vase paintings that have survived for millennia, is filled with scenes of Amazonomachy, the epic battle between Greeks and Amazons. These were not obscure myths, they were popular, mainstream decor. In these dynamic scenes, we see Hercules wrestling the Amazon queen Hippolyta for her sacred belt, or Theseus battling to abduct Antiope. The Amazons are always depicted with remarkable skill and ferocity, often shown on horseback, drawing bows or falling in combat with a tragic nobility. This artistic tradition served a crucial social function. For a young Greek man, seeing these images reinforced a clear message. True heroism and masculinity are proven by overcoming the most formidable of foes, even if those foes are women of exceptional power. It was a constant visual reinforcement of societal values. The influence of the Amazon archetype extended far beyond pottery and into the highest levels of intellectual discourse. The philosopher Plato, in his Republic, uses the Amazons as a reference point when constructing his argument for a guardian class that includes women. He points to them as a real-world example, or at least a believed example, that women are indeed capable of the same martial virtues as men. This is a staggering moment where a mythical construct is leveraged in a serious philosophical debate about the very structure of an ideal society. Even in their role as the ultimate outsiders, the Amazons were forcing Greek thinkers to confront the limitations of their own gender norms. They were a versatile symbol, deployed both to reinforce the status quo and, in the hands of a thinker like Plato, to challenge its foundations and imagine new possibilities. This complex duality is what makes the Amazons so endlessly fascinating. They were simultaneously a threat to be vanquished and an ideal to be acknowledged. The Greeks feared their inversion of the natural order, yet they could not help but admire their prowess and courage. This reveals a deep, underlying tension within Greek culture itself, an acknowledgement that female capability was vast and potentially dangerous if left uncontained. The Amazon myth provided a safe, symbolic arena to navigate these tensions, to play out the anxieties about power, autonomy, and gender that simmered beneath the surface of their civilized world. By understanding this cultural context, we see the Amazons not as a simple story, but as a crucial key to unlocking the complex mindset of the ancient Greeks, setting the stage for the real women whose lives inspired such a potent and enduring legend. The discovery of these graves was just the beginning. To truly grasp their significance, we have to look at what was buried alongside these women. It wasn't just a single token arrowhead. Archaeologists have found entire arsenals. A typical warrior's grave might contain a sturdy wooden bow and a gorytos, a combined bow case and quiver holding up to 200 bronze-tipped arrows. Alongside these were iron swords, spears, and sometimes even protective armor like scale mail shirts. But perhaps the most telling artifacts are those related to horses. Many of these women were buried with bridles, bits, and other riding gear, and in some spectacular cases, the skeletons of their horses were interred right beside them. This was the full kit of a highly mobile horse archer, a warrior whose life was spent in the saddle. The care taken in these burials with such valuable and personal items tells us these were not just women who could fight in a pinch. Their martial prowess was a core part of their identity, worthy of being honored in death. The physical evidence doesn't stop with the artifacts. The skeletons themselves tell a violent and compelling story. Forensic anthropologists examining these remains have found clear, undeniable proof of a life of combat. One of the most famous examples is a Sarmatian woman whose skeleton shows a horrific but telling collection of injuries. An arrowhead was found lodged in her knee cavity, and her leg bones show signs of severe, repeated stress from a life spent riding horses. Most dramatically, her skull exhibits a massive fracture, likely from a battle axe or mace that had begun to heal, meaning she survived this devastating blow only to fight another day. These are not the injuries of a raider or a victim. They are the wounds of a front-line warrior who engaged in face-to-face combat. This tangible proof moves the discussion from theoretical speculation into the realm of documented history. These women fought, they were injured, and they often died from their wounds. This archaeological reality forces us to re-examine the Greek accounts with new eyes. When the historian Herodotus wrote about the Scythians, he described a people who drank fermented mare's milk, lived on wagons, and whose women rode and fought alongside the men. For centuries, this was read as colorful storytelling or a misunderstanding of a foreign culture. Now, we understand that Herodotus was likely reporting what Greek travelers and merchants had actually witnessed or heard credible reports about. The Greeks, whose own women were largely excluded from public life and warfare, would have been utterly astonished by the sight of these highly mobile, highly skilled female archers. The stories they brought back to Athens or Corinth would have been sensationalized with each retelling. The nuance of a nomadic society where everyone contributed to defense was gradually stripped away, morphing into the simpler, more dramatic legend of a tribe that excluded men entirely. The myth was a distorted reflection, but the reflection was of something very real. It's crucial, however, to correct one of the biggest misconceptions propagated by the myth. These warrior women were not part of a separatist, women-only society. They were fully integrated members of the Scythian and Sarmatian cultures. In the harsh environment of the steppe, survival depended on every member of the community being capable and contributing. Rigid gender roles were a luxury that nomadic pastoralists could not afford. A woman's ability to ride, hunt, and defend the tribe's herds and people was not seen as a rejection of her femininity, but as a vital and respected skill. Their graves are often found alongside those of male warriors, and they contain similar objects of personal adornment, fine mirrors, intricate jewelry, and containers for cosmetics, indicating that they embraced both their martial and their domestic roles. They were not man-hating Amazons, they were complete individuals within a society that had a much broader definition of what a woman could be. This incredible body of evidence fundamentally bridges the gap between fantastical legend and documented history. It shows us that the Amazon myth, for all its exaggerations and inversions, was born from a seed of truth. The Greeks encountered or heard tales of these formidable women from the north and east, and their cultural imagination did the rest, transforming them into a powerful symbol that reflected their own anxieties and aspirations. The real story is in many ways more impressive than the myth. It reveals a historical reality where women could be honored warriors, riders, and leaders not as a rebellion against their society, but as an integral part of it. This tangible proof sets the stage for understanding how these real figures were then processed through the lens of Greek culture, appearing next in the epic poems and tragic plays that would cement their legendary status for centuries to come. This literary journey into the world of the Amazons begins with its most famous starting point, Homer's Iliad. In a single, pivotal moment, the Trojan king Priam looks out at the Greek hero Achilles raging on the battlefield and remarks that he fights like one of them, the Amazons, the equal of men. This brief mention is incredibly telling. They are not described as monsters or curiosities. They are established as a known standard of martial excellence, a benchmark for the greatest of Greek warriors. By placing them as allies of the Trojans, the enemies of the Greek heroes, Homer also subtly casts them in the role of the other, a formidable force from the mysterious East that stands in opposition to Greek civilization. This early portrayal set a powerful precedent, establishing the Amazons not as a mere footnote, but as a symbol of ultimate martial prowess that the Greek world would spend centuries grappling with. As we move beyond Homer, the depictions become richer and more detailed, though often more fantastical. The historian Herodotus, often called the father of history, provides what he presents as a more factual account. He describes a people called the Sarmatians, claiming they were the descendants of Scythian men and a group of Amazons who had been shipwrecked. According to his narrative, these two groups met, and the Amazons gradually learned the Scythian language but refused to adopt the sedentary lifestyle of Scythian women, insisting instead that their new husbands join them in a life of riding and hunting. Herodotus's account is fascinating because it reads like an attempt to rationalize a myth. He's trying to explain the existence of real, independent warrior women he's heard about on the steppes by weaving them into a legendary origin story. His description, while still filtered through a Greek lens, gets us closer to the cultural encounter that likely sparked the entire legend. The Greek astonishment at seeing nomadic societies where women lived and fought alongside men. The most revealing portrayals, however, are found not in histories but in the myths crafted for a Greek audience, where the Amazons serve a very specific cultural purpose. The labors of Hercules provide a perfect example. His ninth labor was to retrieve the war belt or girdle of the Amazon queen Hippolyta. In some versions of the tale, Hippolyta is willing to give Hercules the belt peacefully, recognizing his greatness. But the goddess Hera, always seeking to undermine Hercules, spreads a rumor that he has come to kidnap the queen, inciting the Amazons to attack. The peaceful resolution is shattered, and Hercules is forced to kill Hippolyta and take the belt by force. This story is a masterclass in Greek anxiety. It presents the possibility of a peaceful interaction with a powerful female ruler, only to quickly retreat into a more comfortable narrative that such power cannot be reasoned with and must ultimately be dominated through violence. The myth reinforces the idea that Greek masculine heroism is proven by conquering the most powerful foreign women. This theme of conquest is repeated in the story of another hero, Theseus, the legendary founder of Athens. In this myth, Theseus voyages to the land of the Amazons and, depending on the telling, either abducts or seduces their queen, Antiope, and brings her back to Athens as his bride. Enraged by this, the Amazons launch a massive military expedition to besiege Athens itself, fighting all the way to the very foot of the Acropolis. This story, known as the Attic War, is perhaps the ultimate expression of the Amazon threat. It brings the fear of powerful, autonomous women from the distant edges of the map right to the heart of Greek civilization. Their eventual defeat at the gates of Athens served as a powerful symbolic victory, assuring Athenian citizens that their city-state, and by extension their patriarchal way of life, could withstand any challenge, even one led by an army of women. What becomes clear from analyzing these varied texts is that the Amazons were an incredibly flexible literary tool. An author could portray them as noble and heroic to make a point about valor, or as savage and barbaric to highlight the superiority of Greek culture. Their depiction depended entirely on the story's needs. A tragic playwright might use an Amazon character, like Penthesilia, the queen who Achilles kills at Troy only to fall in love with her in her dying moments, to explore themes of pity, respect, and the tragic waste of war. In this moment, the Amazon is humanized, her death portrayed as a profound loss. Conversely, a comedian might use them for crude jokes about gender roles. This malleability is what made them so enduring. They were a blank canvas upon which Greek writers could project their deepest cultural fears, their highest ideals of heroism, and their most complex questions about the nature of the world beyond their borders. By tracing their evolution through these ancient texts, we see not a fixed legend, but a conversation, a centuries-long debate about power, gender, and identity that was central to the Greek understanding of themselves and their place in the world. The story of Hippolyta and Hercules is far more than a simple quest. It is a profound cultural collision, a narrative where myth becomes a battleground for competing ideas of power and authority. At its heart lies the magical girdle, a gift from the war god Ares to his daughter, Queen Hippolyta. To the Amazons, this was no mere piece of adornment. It was a powerful symbol of her rightful rule and the autonomy of her people, a tangible representation of their self-governance and strength. For the Greek hero Hercules, however, it was simply an object to be collected, the ninth labor imposed upon him by King Eurystheus. This fundamental clash of perspectives, one seeing sacred sovereignty, the other seeing a trophy, sets the stage for a myth that brilliantly exposes the anxieties of the ancient Greek world. The most telling aspect of this legend is its startling variation across different ancient sources. In one version, Hercules arrives in Themyscira, the Amazon capital, and presents his case. Hippolyta, recognizing his immense strength and his divine mandate, is impressed by his honor and agrees to freely give him the girdle. This narrative presents a fascinating possibility, a peaceful exchange between Greek masculinity and Amazonian femininity, built on a foundation of mutual respect. It suggests a world where powerful women can be reasoned with and where their authority is legitimate enough to be voluntarily granted. Yet, this peaceful resolution is almost always shattered. In the more common and dramatic version, the goddess Hera, who harbors a bitter hatred for Hercules, intervenes. Disguised as an Amazon, she moves through the city, spreading a vicious rumor that the foreign hero has actually come to kidnap their queen. Trust turns to terror, and the Amazons, believing they are defending Hippolyta, arm themselves and attack Hercules' ship. Assuming he has been betrayed, Hercules reacts with devastating force, killing Hippolyta and taking the girdle from her lifeless body. This dramatic shift from potential peace to inevitable violence is incredibly significant. The Greeks themselves seem to have been uncomfortable with the first version, the one where a woman's power is willingly given and a man receives it without a fight. The narrative that endured is the one where that power must be taken by force, justified by deception and a resulting conflict. The subtext is clear. A society of powerful, autonomous women cannot be integrated with. It must be dominated and defeated for the Greek hero to truly prove his worth. Hercules' victory is not over a monster, but over a queen and her entire way of life. The theft of the girdle becomes a powerful metaphor for the dismantling of female authority, a symbolic act that reinforces the patriarchal structures of Greek society by showing that even the most formidable female power can and must be subjugated by masculine heroism. This myth was instrumental in defining the very essence of Greek heroic identity. A hero's greatness was measured by the scale of the obstacles he overcame. By making an Amazon queen and her warrior nation the obstacle, the myth elevated Hercules' labors to a new level. His triumph was not just over a physical foe, but over a profound ideological threat. The story served as a reassuring cultural parable for its Greek audience, demonstrating that their values would always prevail against even the most frightening and inverted social orders. Yet within this tale of conquest, we also find a thread of reluctant admiration. The fact that Hippolyta was considered a worthy opponent for a demigod, and that her girdle was a prize worthy of a labor, acknowledges a deep-seated respect for Amazonian prowess. This complex mix of fear, admiration, and the need to conquer perfectly encapsulates the Greek fascination with these warrior women, a fascination that would soon find its most tragic expression in the tale of another legendary queen, Penthesilia, on the bloody fields of Troy. If the story of Hippolyta is about the conquest of female power, then the tale of Penthesilia is about its tragic poignancy. Following the death of the great Trojan hero Hector, the city's fortunes were at their lowest ebb. It is at this moment of profound despair that a new, unexpected ally arrives, Penthesilia, queen of the Amazons, and her contingent of fierce warriors. Her reason for coming is itself layered with tragedy. Some versions of the myth say she sought glory, but others claim she was there for atonement, seeking a noble death in battle to cleanse herself of the guilt of having accidentally killed her own sister during a hunt. From the very start, she is not a simple antagonist but a deeply complex figure, driven by the same human emotions of grief and the desire for redemption that motivated the Greek and Trojan heroes themselves. Her entrance onto the battlefield is nothing short of spectacular. The weary Trojans, who had been pushed back to their very walls, watch in awe as this foreign queen and her female warriors revitalize their defense. Penthesilia cuts through the Greek ranks with terrifying skill, a whirlwind of destruction that momentarily turns the tide of the war. She becomes a beacon of hope, a symbol that even in the darkest hour, salvation can arrive from the most unexpected quarter. This portrayal is crucial. The Amazons are not just mindless aggressors, they are noble allies bound by a code of honor that compels them to aid a city under siege. Their valor is undeniable, and for a brief, shining moment, they are the heroes of the story, challenging the audience's expectation that the Greek perspective is the only one that matters. This brilliant display, however, inevitably draws the attention of the greatest of the Greek warriors, Achilles. Their confrontation is the stuff of legend, a clash between the pinnacle of Greek martial might and the finest expression of Amazonian prowess. In the end, Achilles' skill prevails, and he strikes down the Amazon queen. But what happens next elevates this myth from a simple combat tale into a profound commentary on the futility and strange beauty of war. As Achilles stands over her lifeless body, he removes her helmet. In that moment, he does not see a vanquished foe or a barbarian. He sees the noble and beautiful woman she was, and he is overcome with a devastating wave of remorse and love. The fierce joy of victory is instantly replaced by a piercing grief for the life he has extinguished. This incredible detail, Achilles falling in love with Penthesilia in the moment of her death, is one of the most powerful and humanizing moments in all of Greek mythology. It completely shatters the simplistic binary of Greek versus barbarian, good versus evil. The greatest hero of the Greeks is forced to acknowledge the humanity and nobility of his enemy, realizing too late that her death is not a triumph but a profound loss. A Greek soldier named the Scythian, witnessing this scene, mocks Achilles for his seemingly unheroic grief. In a rage, Achilles turns and kills the Scythian, an act that underscores just how deeply and genuinely he was affected. His sorrow is so immense that he is said to have treated Penthesilia's body with the utmost respect, ensuring she received a proper hero's burial. The story of Penthesilia, therefore, is the ultimate exploration of the Amazon as a tragic figure. She is the formidable opponent who is also deeply admired, the enemy who is also an object of love and profound regret. Her narrative forces the Greeks, and by extension us, to confront the terrible cost of war and the shared humanity that exists even between the bitterest of foes. She is a symbol of valor and sacrifice, yes, but also of the tragic waste that occurs when such remarkable individuals are destroyed by conflict. This complex legacy ensured her story would be told and retold, not just in epic poetry but captured for eternity in the art that adorned the everyday objects of the ancient world, immortalizing her moment of tragic beauty for generations to see. This artistic obsession with the Amazons is perhaps most vividly preserved on the surfaces of Greek pottery, where their stories were painted in stark black and red figures, frozen in dynamic action for eternity. These vases were not hidden away in museums. They were everyday objects used in symposia, given as prizes, and placed in tombs, meaning the image of the powerful Amazon was a constant presence in the Greek cultural imagination. The scenes are almost always ones of intense motion and conflict, a whirlwind of rearing horses, drawn bows, and clashing weapons. What is immediately striking is how the artists took great care to distinguish the Amazons from Greek women. They are almost always shown in exotic, practical attire, patterned trousers known as anaxirides, fitted tunics, and the distinctive Phrygian cap, a soft, pointed headpiece that marked them as Easterners. This detailed costuming wasn't just about realism. It was a visual shorthand for their otherness, setting them apart from the draped, domestic figures of Athenian women. Their weaponry is also meticulously depicted, and it tells a specific story about how the Greeks viewed their fighting style. They are most frequently shown as horse archers, drawing back a Scythian-style bow from the saddle, or wielding a distinctive double-headed axe known as a labris. This was a conscious choice by the artists. The Greeks prided themselves on the close quarters, shield-wall combat of the hoplite phalanx, a masculine, communal form of warfare. By consistently portraying the Amazons as agile archers and skirmishers, they were subtly implying a different, and in their eyes, a less honorable, mode of fighting. It was a way to acknowledge their formidable skill while still maintaining a sense of Greek martial superiority. The message was clear: yes, they are powerful, but their power is of a different, more foreign kind. Yet, for all this attempts at othering, the artists consistently granted the Amazons a profound and tragic nobility. In countless scenes, we see them referred to in the painted inscriptions not as barbarians, but by their individual names: Andromache, Glauce, Penthesilia. This personalization is crucial. They are not a faceless horde, they are individuals, heroines in their own right. In many depictions of their defeat, they are shown dying with grace and courage, their bodies arranged in poses that echo those of fallen Greek heroes. A famous vase by Achilles shows the moment Achilles kills Penthesilia, their eyes locked in a powerful gaze that communicates not just violence, but a deep, tragic connection and mutual respect. This artistic choice reveals a complex and conflicted psyche. The Greek viewer could simultaneously enjoy the fantasy of conquering these powerful women and admire their valor, a visual representation of the same fear and fascination found in the myths. The sheer volume of this artwork points to a massive, enduring public appetite for these stories. Scenes of Amazonomachy, the battle between Greeks and Amazons, were among the most popular themes for centuries, appearing on everything from massive wine-mixing craters to delicate oil jars. This wasn't a niche interest, it was mainstream entertainment. Scholars believe these images served a critical social function, especially for young Greek men. For a citizen training to become a hoplite, seeing Theseus defeat an Amazon on a vase was a reinforcement of the ideal masculine virtues: courage, strength, and the defense of the polis against chaotic outside forces. The Amazons became the ultimate training dummy for the Greek ego, a symbolic enemy whose defeat justified the entire social order. Over time, these depictions evolved, subtly mirroring Greece's changing relationship with the actual world beyond its borders. Early portrayals often showed the Amazons as truly monstrous and foreign. But as Greek contact with places like Scythia and Persia increased through trade and war, the depictions became more realistic and nuanced. The Amazons began to look less like mythical monsters and more like the real Sarmatian or Persian horse archers the Greeks were encountering. This shift is profound. It demonstrates that the legend was not static. It was a living story that adapted to reflect new knowledge and new geopolitical anxieties. The Amazon myth became a way to process and understand the very real, powerful foreign cultures that were increasingly knocking on Greece's door. This artistic journey, from fantastical symbol to a reflection of real-world encounters, provides the perfect visual bridge to asking the next logical question. If the art was influenced by real people, where on the map did the Greeks believe this legendary race actually lived? Pinpointing the exact homeland of the Amazons is like trying to capture a mirage. The location shifts depending on which ancient author you consult, revealing more about the Greek worldview than any specific geographical reality. For Herodotus, the great chronicler, the answer lay in the vast, open steppes north of the Black Sea, in the territory of the Scythians, a region encompassing parts of what is now Ukraine and southern Russia. This wasn't a random choice. To the Greeks, this was the ultimate frontier, a sweeping, untamed landscape that stood in stark contrast to their own rocky, coastal city-states. It was a place they knew through trade and fraught encounter, a land of nomadic horse archers whose customs were utterly foreign, and therefore the perfect breeding ground for legend. Placing the Amazons here at the very edge of their known world made perfect sense to a Greek audience. It was distant enough to be mysterious, yet real enough to be believable. But other writers cast their gaze in different directions, each assignment serving a different narrative purpose. Some versions of the myth, for instance, firmly placed the Amazon capital of Themyscira on the southern coast of the Black Sea in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey. This location brought the legendary warriors much closer to home, making them a more immediate and tangible threat to the Greek colonies in that region. It transformed them from a distant curiosity into a neighboring peril, justifying tales of military expeditions and conflicts. Even more strikingly, other traditions connected the Amazons to North Africa, specifically Libya. In these accounts, they were linked to the powerful goddess Athena, and even said to have founded the city of Chersonesus. This southern placement often framed them as representatives of an ancient matriarchal order that existed before the rise of the Greek Olympian gods, adding a layer of primordial mystery to their origins. This geographical confusion isn't a sign of poor scholarship on the part of the ancients. It is a fascinating clue to how myth functions. The Greeks were essentially using the blank spaces on their maps as a projective screen for their deepest anxieties and fascinations. Any region that was poorly understood, powerful, and culturally inverted became a potential candidate for the Amazon homeland. The steppes produced fearsome female horse archers. They must be Amazons. The Anatolian highlands were home to powerful priestesses. They must be related. Stories from Libya spoke of tribes with unfamiliar customs. The Amazons must have lived there too. The legend acted as a catch-all explanation for any report of strong, autonomous women living beyond the Greek sphere, a way to categorize the unknown by fitting it into a familiar, if terrifying, mythological framework. Modern archaeology, however, has brought a startling clarity to this ancient game of pin the tail on the donkey. The thousands of kurgans, or burial mounds, discovered across the very same Pontic-Caspian steppe that Herodotus wrote about have provided tangible evidence that seems to validate his general location, if not the fantastical details. The remains of women buried with weapons, horses, and clear signs of battle injuries offer a compelling historical reality behind the myth. These were the women of the Scythian and Sarmatian confederations, nomadic pastoralists whose survival on the open plains demanded that every member of the community be skilled in riding, archery, and defense. The Greeks, encountering these cultures on the edges of their world, witnessed something that shattered their own cultural norms, women who were not only capable in battle but were honored for it. So, while there was no single, literal city of Themyscira inhabited by a tribe that excluded men, there was a very real cultural phenomenon that stretched across a massive geographical area. The homeland of the Amazons, therefore, was not a pin on a map but a way of life that flourished across the Eurasian steppes. The Greeks condensed this vast, complex reality into a single, powerful symbol and placed it wherever their imagination and their limited geographical knowledge saw fit. This blending of real places with imaginative geography is precisely what gives the Amazon legend its enduring power, transforming historical warrior women into the inhabitants of a legendary realm that continues to captivate us today. This brings us to a pivotal and often overlooked truth. The Amazons were not a complete fantasy, but a refracted image of very real women whose bones and belongings are now being pulled from the earth. The nomadic cultures of the Scythians and Sarmatians, who roamed the vast Eurasian steppes for nearly 1,000 years, provide the clearest historical mirror to the legendary tribe. Their way of life was fundamentally different from the settled agricultural societies of Greece. Survival on the open plains was a brutal, all-hands-on-deck endeavor. The threat of rival tribes, wild animals, and the sheer difficulty of managing vast herds meant that every member of the community, regardless of gender, needed to be proficient with a bow and able to defend themselves from the saddle. In this environment, martial skill wasn't a masculine virtue, it was a human necessity. The ancient Greek writer Hippocrates, often called the father of medicine, observed these cultures and left us a remarkably clear account that moves beyond myth. He described the Scythians as a people who lived constantly on their wagons, and he wrote of their women, "They have no right breasts. For while they are yet babies, their mothers make red-hot a bronze instrument constructed for this very purpose, and apply it to the right breast and cauterize it, so that its growth is arrested, and all its strength and bulk are diverted to the right shoulder and arm." This graphic description, while almost certainly an exaggeration or a misunderstanding of what he was told, reveals the profound cultural shock the Greeks experienced. They were trying to rationalize the incredible upper body strength and archery skills of these women by inventing a drastic physical alteration, because the idea that women could naturally achieve such prowess was almost unthinkable within their own societal framework. But we don't have to rely solely on second-hand Greek accounts to understand these women. The archaeological record speaks for itself in a way that is both eloquent and undeniable. Across Ukraine, Russia, and Kazakhstan, excavations of Scythian and Sarmatian burial mounds, known as kurgans, have revealed that between 20 and 30% of graves originally classified as male warriors based on their grave goods were actually the graves of women. These were not casual burials. These women were interred with the full honors of a warrior. A typical grave might contain a full panoply of weapons, a powerful composite bow, a quiver holding dozens of bronze-tipped arrows, spears, lances, and sometimes even swords and daggers. Many were buried with their riding equipment, bridles, bits, and whips, and in several spectacular instances, the complete skeletons of their horses were laid to rest beside them. This was the burial of a person whose identity was deeply intertwined with the horse and the bow. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes not from the artifacts surrounding them, but from their own bodies. Forensic analysis of these skeletons tells a story of a hard, violent, and active life. Many show the telltale signs of a lifetime spent on horseback, curved thigh bones, and knee joints showing severe degeneration from the constant stress of riding. More dramatically, we find the clear marks of battle. There is the skeleton of a Sarmatian woman with an arrowhead still embedded in her leg bone. Another shows a skull fracture from a battle axe that had partially healed, indicating she survived a devastating blow only to fight again. These are not the injuries of a raider or a victim. They are the wounds of a frontline combatant who engaged in face-to-face warfare. This tangible proof moves the discussion from the realm of legend into documented history. What's crucial to understand is that these women were not mythical Amazons living in isolation from men. They were fully integrated, respected members of their nomadic societies. Their graves often also contain objects associated with traditional femininity and wealth, fine jewelry, stone mirrors, spindles, and elaborate vessels. This combination of weaponry and personal adornment is telling. It suggests they embraced a complete identity. They were not defined solely by their martial role. They could be warriors, mothers, leaders, and craftswomen simultaneously. Their power was not a rejection of their society, but an integral part of its success. This reality stands in stark contrast to the Greek myth of a separatist tribe, revealing that the Amazons were a dramatic exaggeration born from a culture that could only comprehend such female power as an inversion of the natural order, rather than a normalized component of a different way of life. This comparison invites a fascinating exploration of the specific rituals the Greeks attributed to the Amazons, particularly the shocking practice they believed defined them. Perhaps the most persistent and shocking detail attached to the Amazons was the belief that they removed or cauterized their right breast. The ancient Greeks had a specific term for this, amazos, meaning without a breast, which is where the very name Amazon is said to have originated. The logic, as explained by writers and physicians of the time, was purely functional. Removing this tissue would prevent it from interfering with the draw of a bowstring, allowing for a smoother, more powerful shot. This graphic image of a self-mutilated, single-breasted warrior became a central pillar of the legend, a visceral symbol of how far these women would go to reject their femininity in the pursuit of martial perfection. It was the ultimate signifier of their otherness, a physical deformity that matched their perceived social deformity. But when we examine the historical record, this defining characteristic completely falls apart. Not a single piece of ancient art, from the thousands of vase paintings to the elaborate sculptures on monuments like the Parthenon, ever depicts an Amazon with a missing breast. They are always shown as whole and often idealized in their physical form. This glaring contradiction between the written myth and the visual record is our first major clue that we are dealing with a symbolic invention rather than a historical practice. The story of breast removal was likely a gruesome exaggeration, a piece of sensational gossip that circulated to explain the incredible archery skills of nomadic women. For the Greeks, it was easier to believe in a drastic physical alteration than to accept that female bodies could naturally achieve such formidable prowess. The myth served to create a clear physical boundary between normal Greek women and the terrifying, altered Amazons. This fabricated ritual points to a larger pattern in how Greek authors described Amazonian society. Historians like Strabo and Diodorus Siculus filled their accounts with elaborate social structures designed to explain the seemingly impossible. How could a tribe of only women survive and propagate? Their answer was a set of bizarre and transactional rituals. They claimed the Amazons would meet with a neighboring tribe, the Gargarians, once a year for the sole purpose of procreation. After this encounter, any male children born were either sent away to their fathers, killed or crippled, while female children were kept and raised as the next generation of warriors. These descriptions are textbook examples of ethnographic stereotyping. The Greeks were attempting to solve a narrative problem they themselves had created, constructing a logical, if horrifying, system to sustain their own myth. In doing so, they projected their deepest anxieties about female independence onto a foreign people, creating a caricature of a society that had completely inverted the natural order as they knew it. The reality, as revealed by archaeology, offers a powerful and much more reasonable contrast. The Sarmatian and Scythian women who inspired these tales did not live in isolation. They were integral members of their nomadic communities. Their graves are frequently found alongside those of men and children, indicating a society based on family and clan structures, not separatism. Furthermore, the idea that they would kill or abandon male children is utterly refuted by the burial evidence. The graves of Sarmatian boys often contain small bows and arrows, showing they were being raised in the same warrior tradition. These were not women-only societies. They were cultures with a more equitable distribution of labor where martial skill was valued in all members, regardless of gender. The Greek myth took this kernel of truth, that women fought alongside men, and twisted it into a fantastical and monstrous reflection to serve its own psychological needs. Ultimately, these exaggerated accounts of Amazon rituals tell us infinitely more about the ancient Greeks than they do about any historical warrior women. The myths functioned as a safe space to explore taboo ideas about female power, autonomy, and sexuality. By placing these radical social structures in a distant land, Greek writers could interrogate their own cultural norms without directly challenging them. The Amazon became a convenient symbol for everything that lay outside the Greek ideal: the rejection of motherhood, the refusal of male authority, and the terrifying prospect of a world where women held ultimate control. This process of myth-making is not unique to antiquity. It is a timeless human tendency to exaggerate the customs of foreign cultures, transforming difference into danger and complexity into simple, sensational stories. By deconstructing these rituals, we peel back another layer of the legend, moving closer to understanding how these real, formidable women were processed and packaged into one of history's most enduring archetypes. This modern reimagining of the Amazons finds its most powerful and popular expression in the iconic figure of Wonder Woman, created by psychologist William Moulton Marston in 1941. The Amazon princess from the Mycera is a direct descendant of this ancient mythos, re-engineered for the 20th century. Marston, who lived in a polyamorous relationship with two women, was deeply interested in themes of female superiority and peaceful governance. His Amazons were not just warriors, they were a technologically advanced, isolated utopia, free from the corruption and violence of the world of men. Wonder Woman, or Diana Prince, was their emissary, using her strength and compassion to fight for justice and equality. Her very origin story is a feminist allegory, positioning Amazonian values as a healing force for a broken patriarchal world. This character didn't just borrow the name, she embodied the spirit of the myth repurposed for a new era, becoming a global symbol of female power that is both compassionate and incredibly strong. Beyond the comic book page, the Amazon archetype has been powerfully adopted by various feminist movements as a symbol of resistance and self-determination. During the women's liberation movements of the 1960s and 70s, the image of the fierce, independent warrior woman resonated deeply. She represented a rejection of traditional, restrictive gender roles and the fight for autonomy over one's own body and life. This symbolism continues today, where the term Amazon is often used to describe tall, athletic, or powerfully assertive women, stripping the word of any ancient stigma and reclaiming it as a badge of honor. This cultural repurposing is significant because it demonstrates how a myth originally crafted by men to explore their own anxieties can be seized and transformed by women to articulate their own aspirations for power, agency, and community. Scholars have played a crucial role in this reclamation, using the growing archaeological evidence of real warrior women to challenge long-held historical narratives that have sidelined female experiences. By pointing to the Scythian and Sarmatian graves, historians can now argue that the Greek myths were not pure fiction, but a distorted reflection of a real cultural phenomenon. This evidence is used to critique the inherent gender bias in traditional historiography, which has often dismissed or minimized accounts of powerful women as mythological or anomalous. The Amazons have become a case study in recovering a more inclusive past, proving that women have always been active participants in history, including in the realms of warfare and leadership that were once considered exclusively male domains. However, this embrace of the Amazon ideal is not without its complexities and potential pitfalls. Some scholars caution against a form of romanticization that overlooks the harsh realities of the nomadic steppe cultures that inspired the legend. The life of a Scythian warrior was undoubtedly grueling, short, and violent, far removed from the glamorous, empowered fantasy often portrayed in modern media. Furthermore, the modern feminist interpretation can sometimes risk creating its own simplistic narrative, smoothing over the nuances of the original Greek myths where Amazons were often complex antagonists, not straightforward heroines. The debate continues as to whether selectively appropriating these ancient figures to serve contemporary goals, while intellectually productive, might also involve simplifying a messy and multifaceted past. Despite these scholarly debates, the enduring power of the Amazon figure is undeniable. Their journey from terrifying outsiders in Greek vase paintings to celebrated icons of pop culture and feminist thought demonstrates the incredible plasticity of myth. They are a story that we continually reshape to meet our present needs, a mirror reflecting our evolving values and struggles around gender and power. This ability to adapt and remain relevant is the true mark of a powerful legend. It shows that these ancient tales are not dead artifacts but living conversations, and the conversation about strong women, their place in history, and their representation in our stories is more vibrant today than ever before. This journey from ancient myth to modern icon finds perhaps its most powerful expression in the world of comics and cinema. The character of Wonder Woman, created by psychologist William Moulton Marston in 1941, represents the most significant and deliberate reinvention of the Amazon archetype for a contemporary audience. Princess Diana of the Masera is not merely a warrior, she is an ambassador, a figure whose mission is to bring Amazonian ideals of peace, justice, and equality to a world plagued by conflict and hatred. Her homeland, the Masera, is a direct lift from the ancient legends, reimagined not as a savage frontier but as a secluded, idyllic paradise, a technologically advanced utopia free from the corruption of man's world. This portrayal fundamentally shifts the narrative. The Amazons are no longer the terrifying other to be conquered by Greek heroes. They are presented as a superior society whose values are the very cure for a broken patriarchal system. Wonder Woman's immense popularity, especially following the groundbreaking 2017 film, introduced this refined Amazonian ideal to a global audience, cementing the image of the warrior woman as both compassionate and incredibly strong. Beyond the DC universe, the allure of the Amazon has permeated countless other corners of pop culture, each adaptation offering a new lens through which to view these legendary figures. From the fierce, nomadic horse archers in the Xena, warrior princess television series to the scholarly and mystical Amazons in Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson books, each interpretation highlights different aspects of the myth. Some emphasize their martial prowess and isolation, while others focus on their wisdom and ancient knowledge. These portrayals exist on a wide spectrum, ranging from attempts at historical fidelity to taking massive creative liberties for the sake of storytelling. For instance, the portrayal of the Amazons in the Wonder Woman film as a diverse sisterhood of warriors from all corners of the ancient world is a clear modern invention, but one that serves a powerful purpose: to represent a universal sisterhood of strength. This constant reimagining is not a distortion of the original myths, but rather a continuation of the very process that the Greeks began, constantly reshaping the legend to reflect contemporary values, fears, and aspirations. However, this repackaging for a mass audience is not without its complexities. There is a risk of oversimplification, of reducing the rich, multifaceted Amazon mythos into a single, easily marketable trope, often that of the exotic, flawless, and hyper-athletic warrior woman. This can sometimes strip the characters of the tragic depth and cultural ambiguity that made the original Greek portrayals so compelling. The tendency to place them in revealing armor or to focus solely on their physicality can veer into exoticization, echoing the very same othering that the ancient Greeks engaged in, albeit for a different purpose. The challenge for modern storytellers is to honor the complexity of the archetype, to explore the nuances of a society that lives apart without falling back on simplistic or sensationalized stereotypes. The most successful adaptations manage to balance spectacle with substance, giving us Amazons who are not just powerful bodies, but also complex minds with their own philosophies, conflicts, and internal struggles. Ultimately, the relentless appeal of the Amazon in pop culture points to a profound and enduring psychological need. She is a powerful symbol of female autonomy and agency, a figure who exists entirely outside of traditional patriarchal structures. In a world where women are still fighting for equality and against violence, the fantasy of a peaceful, powerful, and self-sufficient society of women holds IMMENSE Chinese letter Chinese letter Chinese letter. She represents the possibility of a world where female strength is not just accepted but is the foundational principle of society. The Amazon allows us to safely explore questions about power, gender, and community. By watching her stories, we engage in a conversation about what a world run by different values might look like and what we might learn from it. This cultural journey shows that the Amazon is far more than a relic of antiquity. She is a dynamic and ever-evolving mirror, reflecting our own society's ongoing fascinations, struggles, and hopes surrounding the nature of female power. This enduring fascination with the Amazons is far more than a simple interest in history or myth. It taps into something much deeper within our collective psyche. At its core, the legend presents us with a profound and thrilling what-if scenario. What if human society had developed along a completely different path, one where women held ultimate political and military authority? This question challenges the very foundations of the patriarchal structures that have dominated most of recorded history, offering a tantalizing glimpse into an alternative reality. It allows us to safely explore our own anxieties and curiosities about power, identity, and freedom from within the safe container of a story. The Amazons become a mythical playground where we can experiment with inverting social norms without any real-world consequences, satisfying a deep human desire to question and imagine alternatives to the world we know. This psychological appeal is powerfully amplified by the archetype of the warrior woman herself, a figure that combines traits often placed in opposition. The Amazon is both beautiful and fierce, compassionate and deadly, maternal and martial. This fusion creates a uniquely compelling character that transcends simplistic labels. She is not just a woman acting like a man. She represents a wholly integrated form of power that is distinctly feminine yet utterly formidable. This archetype resonates across cultures and eras because it speaks to a more complete human potential, one that isn't limited by rigid gender expectations. She embodies a fantasy of wholeness where one doesn't have to choose between strength and sensitivity, between protecting and nurturing. This is why she appears in the dreams of little girls and the fantasies of adults, representing a form of agency that is both aspirational and empowering. Furthermore, the Amazons fascinate us because they represent the ultimate exotic other. For the ancient Greeks, they lived at the very edge of the known world, in a mysterious and dangerous realm. For us today, they exist at the boundary of history and myth, a tantalizing possibility just beyond the reach of proof. This distance allows them to symbolize pure freedom and autonomy, untainted by the complexities and compromises of our own reality. They are a blank screen onto which we can project our deepest yearnings for a society that might be more just, more equitable, or simply more exciting. Their very elusiveness is key to their power. Because they are not fully real, they can remain perfect ideals, forever unconquered and unconquerable by the mundane flaws of our world. This psychological dimension is crucial to understanding why the Amazon legend has not only persisted but thrived for thousands of years. It is not a static relic but a dynamic story that each generation reinvents to address its own preoccupations. In eras where gender roles are strictly enforced, the Amazons serve as a thrilling and subversive outlet. In times of social change and feminist movement, they become a potent symbol of resistance and a vision of what could be. They allow us to grapple with the big questions. Are our social structures innate or invented? What is the true nature of male and female potential? The legend provides no easy answers, but it gives us a powerful language and a cast of characters with which to ask the questions. This ongoing conversation, this endless reinterpretation, is what truly makes the Amazons immortal. They live on because we continue to need them, not as historical figures, but as mirrors reflecting our own evolving struggles and hopes about power, gender, and the very shape of human society. Of course, the existence of these formidable women is not a settled fact in the academic world. It remains one of history's most spirited debates. Scholars are deeply divided, and their disagreements reveal just how challenging it can be to separate historical truth from powerful cultural storytelling. On one side of this divide stand the traditionalists, those who argue that the Amazons were, and always will be, a purely mythological construct. From this perspective, these warrior women never actually existed as a distinct tribe. Instead, they were a brilliant narrative invention, a symbolic other created by the Greek psyche to define itself by contrast. These scholars point out that every ancient account we have comes from Greek or Roman men, who are often reporting hearsay about distant lands they had never visited. The stories of single-breasted women living without men, they argue, are classic folktale motifs designed to reinforce Greek gender norms. By telling tales of these inverted societies being conquered by heroes like Hercules and Theseus, Greek culture was performing a crucial ideological function. It was reinforcing its own social order and demonstrating the superiority of its patriarchal system over any alternative. Yet, standing firmly on the other side are those who point to the silent, stoic evidence rising from the earth itself. For these historians and archaeologists, the grave sites scattered across the Eurasian steppes are not merely suggestive, they are conclusive. How can a society be deemed purely mythical when we have the skeletons of its women, buried with their weapons and bearing the unmistakable marks of battle? This camp argues that the Greek myths, while exaggerated and filtered through a lens of cultural bias, were inspired by real encounters with the nomadic cultures of Scythia and Sarmatia. The kernel of truth was there. The Greeks did see women who rode, hunted, and fought with skill that astonished them. The legend, therefore, is not a wholesale invention but a dramatic refraction of a reality the Greeks struggled to comprehend. This view suggests that dismissing the Amazons as pure fantasy is itself an outdated approach, one that ignores the mounting material evidence in favor of an exclusively textual analysis. Adding another critical layer to this debate are the post-colonial scholars who urge us to look at the Amazon myth not for what it says about women, but for what it reveals about how Greek culture viewed everyone else. These critics note that the Amazons are just one example of a broader tendency to exoticize and stereotype non-Greek peoples, whom they lump together under the term barbarians. By placing the Amazons at the literal edges of their known world, the Greeks were engaging in a form of early ethnographic othering. The Amazons, along with other mythical tribes, became a projection screen for Greek anxieties about the unknown and the foreign. This narrative, some argue, perpetuated a colonialist attitude that justified the domination of barbaric cultures by the civilized Greeks. The very act of defining the Amazons is thus seen as an exercise in power, where one culture gets to invent and label another, often with little regard for their actual complexity. This conversation becomes even more nuanced when we consider the perspectives of feminist scholars, who are themselves divided on the Amazon legacy. One camp celebrates the Amazons as powerful, early icons of female autonomy and strength. They see in these figures a potent symbol of resistance against patriarchal domination, a proof concept that women have always been capable of leadership and combat. For them, reclaiming the Amazon is an act of empowerment, a way to insert a narrative of female power into a historical record that has largely erased it. However, another faction within feminist scholarship offers a sharp critique. They caution that in glorifying the Amazon, a woman who adopts traditionally masculine traits like warfare and aggression, we may inadvertently reinforce the very gender binary we seek to dismantle. This view worries that celebrating the warrior woman ideal simply creates a new, equally restrictive box for women to fit into, one that values them for their physical prowess and ability to compete in a man's world, rather than challenging the system itself. What all these debates highlight is the immense challenge of interpreting ancient sources through our modern lenses. Our questions about historical accuracy, colonial bias, and gender politics are products of our time, and we inevitably project our own concerns onto these ancient texts and artifacts. The Amazons stand at the crossroads of this complex interplay between history and myth, between ancient intention and modern interpretation. They remind us that the past is not a fixed, easily digestible story, but a continuous conversation, one that we keep having because the questions they raise about power, identity, and society are forever relevant. Engaging with these criticisms doesn't diminish the Amazons, it enriches our understanding, transforming them from a simple tale of warrior women into a multifaceted prism through which we can examine the deepest questions of human culture. These archaeological discoveries are truly the bedrock upon which our modern understanding stands, transforming the Amazons from myth into a documented historical reality. The most compelling evidence doesn't come from dusty scrolls, but from the earth itself, particularly from the vast network of ancient burial mounds known as kurgans that dot the landscapes of Kazakhstan, southern Russia, and Ukraine. For decades, when archaeologists uncovered a skeleton buried with a full arsenal of weapons, iron swords, quivers of arrows, and spears, they simply assumed they had found a male warrior. It was a conclusion based more on modern bias than ancient evidence. But with the advent of more sophisticated forensic techniques and a willingness to question those assumptions, a startling truth emerged. A significant number of these heavily armed graves, some estimates suggest as many as a quarter or more, actually contained the skeletons of women. One of the most striking examples came to light in 2019 at a site in Western Russia, where researchers excavated a burial dating back to the 4th century BC. Inside, they discovered not one but 4 female skeletons, each one telling a silent but powerful story. 2 of the women were young, in their early 20s, and they were laid to rest with a stunning array of military equipment. Alongside them were iron knives, more than 30 arrowheads, and the unmistakable remnants of horseback riding gear. This was the full kit of a Sarmatian horse archer, a warrior whose life was spent in the saddle. The presence of these items wasn't ceremonial, it was a declaration of identity. These women were buried with what they valued and what defined them in life: their weapons and their horses. It paints a vivid picture of a society where such a role for women was not just accepted, but honored and celebrated in death. The story these bones tell goes far beyond the artifacts placed beside them. Forensic anthropology allows us to read the biographies written in their skeletons, and the narrative is one of a hard, violent, and active life. Many of these women show the classic skeletal markers of a lifetime spent on horseback: curved femurs and deep, worn grooves in their hip bones from the constant stress of riding. But more dramatically, we find the undeniable scars of combat. There is the Sarmatian woman with an arrowhead still lodged in the cavity of her knee. Another skeleton shows a horrific skull fracture, likely from a battle axe or mace, that had actually begun to heal, proof that she survived a devastating blow only to return to the fray. These are not the injuries of a raider or a casual hunter. They are the wounds of a front-line warrior who engaged in direct, face-to-face combat. This tangible, physical evidence moves the discussion from theoretical speculation into the realm of documented history. It is absolutely vital, however, to contextualize these incredible finds correctly. These women were not the inhabitants of a mythical, men-free matriarchy like the legendary Themyscira. They were fully integrated and likely highly respected members of their nomadic Scythian and Sarmatian cultures. Their graves are often found alongside those of male warriors, and they frequently contain a combination of martial items and more traditional objects of femininity and status, such as fine jewelry, elaborate mirrors, and spindles. This blend indicates they embraced a complete identity. They could be warriors, mothers, leaders, and craftswomen all at once. They represent a minority within their societies, but a significant one, demonstrating that these cultures had a far more flexible view of gender roles than their Greek contemporaries. A woman's prowess in battle was not a rebellion against her society. It was a valued skill that contributed to the survival and success of her people on the harsh, open steppe. These graves provide the most tangible link we have to the real warrior women who so astonished the Greeks and sparked 1,000 legends. They are the quiet, stoic proof that the Amazon myth, for all its exaggerations and fantastical elements, was born from a seed of truth. The Greeks, encountering or hearing tales of these formidable female horse archers from the north, filtered what they saw through their own cultural lens, a lens that could only interpret such female power as a complete inversion of their own world. The reality was more nuanced and, in many ways, more impressive. It reveals a historical reality where women could be honored warriors not as a fantastical exception, but as an integral part of their own social fabric. This evidence doesn't just bridge legend and reality. It invites us to completely reimagine the past, to hear the hoofbeats of these women riding across the steppes, and to finally acknowledge their rightful place in history. To truly grasp the reality behind these legendary figures, we must move beyond the symbolic representations and examine the tangible tools of their trade, the actual weapons and tactics that would have defined their existence. If these warrior women were indeed inspired by the nomadic cultures of the steppes, their combat style would have been a masterclass in efficiency and adaptation to their environment, not the fantastical brawls often depicted in myth. Their primary weapon, the one that truly set them apart, was the composite bow. This was no simple piece of curved wood. It was a technological marvel of its time, crafted from layers of wood, sinew, and horn laminated together. This complex construction gave it a tremendous amount of power and range in a relatively compact size, making it the perfect weapon for a warrior on horseback. A skilled archer could unleash a hail of arrows with devastating accuracy while riding at a full gallop, turning themselves into a mobile artillery platform. This bow was their great equalizer, a tool that relied on skill, precision, and practice rather than brute physical strength, allowing a smaller-framed individual to be just as lethal as a larger one. Mounted archery was more than just a skill, it was the entire foundation of their military doctrine. Life on the vast, open grasslands was defined by the horse, and warfare was an extension of that reality. Their strategy was one of supreme mobility, the infamous hit-and-run tactic. They would swarm an enemy, loosing volleys of arrows from a distance, then wheel away before a slower, heavier force could engage them in close combat. They would feign retreat to draw opponents into disarray, only to suddenly turn and fire backward in the famous Parthian shot. This style of fighting required incredible coordination with their horse, almost as if the rider and the animal were a single, fused entity. It was a form of warfare that prized agility, cunning, and endurance over frontal assault, perfectly suited to the geography of the steppes and a stark contrast to the shield-wall phalanx combat that defined Greek warfare. For a Greek hoplite trained to stand his ground in a dense formation, the prospect of facing a cloud of fast-moving horse archers who refused to stand and fight would have been both terrifying and utterly bewildering. While the bow was their signature weapon, their arsenal was far from limited. Archaeological finds in warrior women's graves provide a complete inventory of their combat gear. Alongside quivers filled with bronze-tipped arrows, we find iron swords for close-quarters slashing, lances for thrusting from horseback, and a variety of spears. One weapon, in particular, has become strongly associated with the Amazon legend, the labrys, an iconic double-headed axe. While its presence in Scythian archaeology is less common than the bow, it captured the Greek imagination as a symbol of raw, primal power and authority. In the Greek mind, it became a specialized Amazonian weapon, representing their terrifying deviation from the norm. In reality, their tools were pragmatic. They would have utilized a smaller, one-handed axe as a versatile tool for both combat and daily camp life, not the massive ceremonial labrys of legend. For protection, they likely wore practical leather armor, which offered solid defense against arrows and blades without sacrificing the mobility that was their greatest asset, and carried small, lightweight shields made from woven wicker or leather stretched over a wooden frame. This practical approach to warfare completely demystifies the legend, grounding these women not as supernatural super soldiers, but as highly proficient and adaptable members of their society. Their combat skills weren't a mysterious birthright. They were the result of a lifetime of training and necessity, honed from childhood in a world where every individual was essential for the tribe's defense and survival. The Greek myths, in their typical fashion, took this observable reality and amplified it, transforming skilled female horse archers into a terrifying race of man-hating super warriors. They replaced the practical, laminated composite bow with exotic symbols like the labrys and invented dramatic rituals to explain their proficiency. But when we strip away the mythological exaggeration, we are left with a picture that is, in many ways, more impressive. That of real women who mastered a difficult and dangerous craft, whose expertise in mounted combat was born from their environment and culture, not from fantasy. This focus on their actual methods reveals the profoundly practical side of their lives, showing us that their power was earned through skill and discipline, a natural lead into understanding the vast scope of their roles that extended far beyond the battlefield. At the heart of the Amazon legend, giving it depth and humanity, are the powerful stories of their queens. These were not faceless warriors, but individual women with names, personalities, and tragic destinies that the ancient world could not forget. Figures like Hippolyta, Penthesilia, and Antiope served as the anchors of the mythos, each one embodying a different facet of Amazonian virtue and the inevitable conflict that arose when their world collided with that of the Greeks. Through their narratives, the abstract concept of a warrior society became personal, relatable, and deeply dramatic, transforming the Amazons from a vague threat into a culture with leaders worthy of both respect and profound pity. Hippolyta, the queen of the Amazons, stands as the ultimate symbol of their sovereignty and the tragic cost of its violation. Her most famous story revolves around her magical war belt, a gift from her father, the god Ares, which served as the unmistakable symbol of her rightful authority. When the hero Hercules arrives to claim this girdle as his ninth labor, the myth presents us with a fascinating possibility. In some versions, Hippolyta is so impressed by Hercules' strength and renown that she is willing to give him the belt willingly, a gesture of respect between two powerful leaders. This moment hints at a world where diplomacy between the Amazon matriarchy and Greek patriarchy could exist. Yet, this peaceful resolution is almost always shattered by outside interference, usually from the goddess Hera, who sows distrust and provokes a battle. The narrative that endures is the one where Hercules must kill Hippolyta and take the belt by force. This isn't just a story of a quest, it's a profound metaphor for the dismantling of female authority. Hippolyta's tragedy is that her power, no matter how legitimate or peacefully offered, must ultimately be conquered and possessed by the Greek hero to prove his masculinity and reinforce the patriarchal order. Her story is a chilling lesson about how a culture can acknowledge female strength while simultaneously insisting it must be subjugated. If Hippolyta's tale is about the theft of power, then the story of Penthesilia is about its tragic and beautiful sacrifice. She enters the grandest stage of Greek myth, the Trojan War. Following the death of the great Trojan hero Hector, the city's fortunes are at their lowest ebb. It is at this moment of utter despair that Penthesilia and her contingent of Amazons arrive as unexpected allies. Her reasons for coming are themselves layered with pathos. Some say she sought glory, while others claim she was there for atonement, seeking a noble death in battle to cleanse herself of the guilt of having accidentally killed her own sister. She is immediately a complex and sympathetic figure, a queen driven by very human emotions of grief and a desire for redemption. On the battlefield, she is a whirlwind of destruction, temporarily turning the tide of war and becoming a beacon of hope for the beleaguered Trojans. Her valor is undeniable, making her one of the few figures in the Iliad who is portrayed as a true equal to the Greek heroes. Her inevitable confrontation with Achilles is the stuff of legend, and his victory over her is a given. But what happens next is one of the most poignant moments in all of mythology. As Achilles stands over her lifeless body and removes her helmet, he is instantly overcome with a devastating wave of remorse and love for the noble and beautiful queen he has just slain. This moment completely shatters the simple Greek versus barbarian binary. The greatest of Greek heroes is forced to acknowledge the humanity and nobility of his enemy, realizing that her death is not a triumph but a profound and tragic waste. Penthesilia becomes the ultimate symbol of the noble adversary, whose story explores the terrible cost of war and the shared humanity that exists even between the bitterest of foes. The third pivotal queen, Antiope, presents a narrative that hits even closer to home for the Greeks, particularly the Athenians. Her legend is deeply tied to Theseus, the mythical founder of Athens. In the most common version, Theseus voyages to the land of the Amazons and either abducts or seduces Antiope, bringing her back to Athens as his bride. This act of taking an Amazon queen to be the queen of Athens is loaded with symbolic meaning. It represents an attempt to literally capture and domesticate the wild, feminine power of the Amazons. But the story does not end with a peaceful assimilation. Enraged by this betrayal, the Amazons launch a massive military expedition to besiege Athens itself, fighting their way to the very foot of the Acropolis in what became known as the Attic War. This narrative is the ultimate expression of the Amazon threat, bringing the fear of powerful, autonomous women from the distant edges of the map right to the heart of Greek civilization. The eventual defeat of the Amazons at the gates of Athens served as a powerful symbolic victory for the Athenian citizens, assuring them that their city-state, and by extension their patriarchal way of life, could withstand any challenge, even one led by an army of women. Antiope's story is often one of divided loyalties and tragic conflict, sometimes dying in the battle against her own people, making her a figure of immense personal tragedy caught between two worlds. These queenly narratives were far more than simple adventure tales. They were essential tools for the ancient Greeks to process complex ideas about gender, power, and the other. Hippolyta represented legitimate authority that must be dominated. Penthesilia embodied the noble foe who is admired too late. Antiope symbolized the dangerous allure of the foreign woman, and the catastrophic consequences of trying to possess her. Through their triumphs and tragedies, the Greeks could safely explore their own cultural anxieties about strong women, while ultimately reassuring themselves of their own social order's superiority. These queens personalized the Amazon nation, giving it a face and a heart, and their enduring legends masterfully transition our focus from the internal structure of Amazon society to their inevitable and world-altering interactions with the cultures around them. These legendary conflicts were not merely thrilling adventures, they were foundational stories the Greeks told themselves about who they were. Every time a hero like Hercules clashed with an Amazon queen, it was a symbolic reinforcement of Greek values triumphing over chaos and disorder. The victory was never just physical, it was deeply ideological. By conquering the most formidable women imaginable, the Greek hero proved the superiority of the patriarchal, polis-based way of life. These narratives served as powerful cultural parables, reassuring citizens that their social order was not only correct but destined to prevail against any alternative, no matter how fearsome. The Amazon became the ultimate benchmark for masculinity and heroism, a foe so powerful that defeating her meant you had truly earned your place among the legends. This ideological function is perhaps most vividly illustrated in the Athenian myth of the Amazon invasion. The story goes that after Theseus abducted the Amazon queen Antiope and brought her to Athens, her enraged sisters launched a massive military campaign to besiege the city itself. This was no minor skirmish. It was portrayed as an existential threat, with the Amazons fighting their way to the very foot of the Acropolis. For an Athenian citizen, this tale was a source of immense pride. It positioned their city as the very bulwark of Greek civilization, so significant that it drew the ire of the most powerful foreign force imaginable. Their eventual victory was not just a military success but a moral and cultural one, a definitive proof that the Athenian way of life, democratic, masculine, and ordered, could withstand even the most terrifying inversion of its norms. The myth was a potent piece of propaganda, justifying Athenian superiority and resilience to its own people. Yet, the Greek portrayal of the Amazons was fascinatingly inconsistent, revealing a deep undercurrent of admiration and anxiety beneath the surface-level conflict. They were not always simple monsters to be slain. In the Trojan War epic, Queen Penthesilia and her warriors arrive as noble allies to the beleaguered Trojans after the death of Hector, fighting with a code of honor that matches any Greek hero. And in the heartbreaking moment when Achilles kills Penthesilia only to fall in love with her as she dies, we see the ultimate complication of the simple us versus them dichotomy. This moment of tragic recognition forces the audience to acknowledge the Amazon's humanity, her valor, and the profound waste of her death. This complexity shows that the Greeks didn't just fear the Amazons, they respected them, and that respect made them an even more potent and unsettling symbol. They were a mirror reflecting a terrifying but admirable potential, a world where women could be their equals or perhaps even their betters in the very virtues the Greeks held most dear. Beyond social commentary, these stories often served explicit political purposes, particularly to justify expansionism and colonization. As Greek city-states began establishing colonies around the Black Sea, they encroached on territories traditionally associated with the Amazons in myth. By telling and retelling stories of heroes like Hercules and Theseus conquering these fierce women, they were creating a mythological precedent for their territorial claims. It framed their colonial ambitions not as aggression, but as the continuation of a heroic legacy, a civilizing mission to tame the wild and chaotic edges of the world. The Amazon myths provided a divine right of sorts, a narrative that painted Greek expansion as the natural order of things, overcoming the chaotic forces of the other that had dominated those lands since time immemorial. Ultimately, by studying these intricate interactions, we see the Amazon not as a fixed character, but as a versatile literary device. The Greeks used them as a flexible tool to explore their own evolving self-perception, their deepest anxieties about gender and power, and their political ambitions. They could be monstrous or noble, a dire threat or a tragic loss, depending on the needs of the story. This malleability is what made them so enduring. They were the perfect other against which Greek identity could be defined, questioned, and ultimately reinforced. But as the Greek world itself began to change, undergoing massive political and cultural shifts, the role of the Amazon in the imagination began to transform as well, setting the stage for their eventual decline as a central cultural symbol and their journey into the realm of distant legend. Yet even as the Roman Empire solidified its power and the classical world reached its peak, a slow but undeniable shift was beginning to take place, one that would eventually see the formidable Amazon fade from her prominent place in the cultural imagination. The vibrant, polytheistic world that had given birth to her was gradually transforming, and with that change came a new set of stories and symbols that left little room for the complex warrior queens of old. The rise of Christianity as the dominant force across the Mediterranean and Europe fundamentally altered what societies valued in their heroes and their myths. The new ideals were not of physical prowess and martial glory, but of spiritual purity, faith, and martyrdom. Saints and martyrs replaced heroes and demigods as the central figures of moral instruction, and the Amazon, a creature born of a pagan pantheon, struggled to find a comfortable home within this new moral framework. Her stories weren't erased, but they were often repurposed, stripped of their original nuance, and allegorized to fit a Christian worldview. A figure like Penthesilia, once a tragic symbol of noble sacrifice, might be reinterpreted by a medieval scholar as an embodiment of pagan pride, her defeat a metaphor for the triumph of faith over a chaotic and sinful world. The very qualities that made her fascinating, her autonomy, her strength, her defiance of traditional roles, were now often viewed through a lens of suspicion, seen as traits to be overcome rather than celebrated. This decline was also fueled by a dramatic shift in geopolitical awareness. The vast, mysterious steppes of Scythia, which had long served as the perfect imaginative canvas for the Amazon homeland, were no longer the ultimate frontier. The world had expanded through trade and conquest, and these regions became better known, if still exotic. The real nomadic peoples Europeans encountered, like the Huns or the Mongols, were terrifyingly real and immediate threats. They didn't need to be mythologized into Amazons. Furthermore, the intellectual and cultural center of gravity moved westward. The focus was now on Rome, on the heart of Europe, and on the Holy Land, not on the distant shores of the Black Sea. The lands associated with the Amazons simply fell off the mental map of the average person, becoming a distant curiosity rather than a source of living legend. The stories became fossilized, tales from a bygone era that were copied by monastic scribes, but rarely expanded upon or reimagined with the same creative energy they had inspired in the Greek world. It is crucial to understand, however, that this was a fade into the background, not a disappearance. The Amazon legend was never truly lost. It was preserved like a seed in the winter ground, safeguarded in the libraries of monasteries and the pages of precious manuscripts. Scholars and encyclopedists of the medieval period, like Isidore of Seville, still recorded the Amazons in their catalogues of ancient wonders and strange races, treating them as a historical reality from a distant past. Their tales were kept alive in the continuing popularity of authors like Ovid and the retelling of the Trojan War, ensuring that names like Penthesilia and Hippolyta were never completely forgotten. This long period of dormancy was necessary, a quiet chapter that allowed these stories to survive the collapse of the classical world. They waited patiently for a time when the cultural climate would change once more, when a renewed interest in the art and literature of antiquity would spark a rediscovery of these powerful figures and provide the fertile ground needed for the Amazon to rise again, not as a moral lesson, but as an inspiration. After centuries of dormancy, the Amazons were jolted back to life, not by the discovery of new lands, but by the rediscovery of old books. The Renaissance, with its passionate revival of classical antiquity, opened long-shuttered libraries and brought the works of Homer, Herodotus, and Diodorus Siculus back into the light. For artists and thinkers of this era, these texts were not mere history. They were a wellspring of inspiration. Suddenly, the formidable figures of Penthesilia and Hippolyta were reborn on canvas and in marble. Artists like Peter Paul Rubens depicted their battles with a dynamic, muscular energy, while sculptors captured their tragic nobility. This was no longer a medieval allegory. It was a celebration of the human form and classical drama, with the Amazon standing as a powerful symbol of both beauty and fierce, untamed nature, perfectly embodying the Renaissance's fascination with the ideals of the ancient world. As the intellectual currents shifted from Renaissance revival to Enlightenment reason, the Amazon's role evolved once again. She was no longer just a subject for art, she became a weapon in philosophical debates. Thinkers of the period, grappling with radical new ideas about natural law, the social contract, and the rights of individuals, found the Amazon legend to be the perfect thought experiment. Could a society of women exist? What would it reveal about the so-called natural order of gender roles? The philosopher Montesquieu, in his monumental work The Spirit of the Laws, used the Amazons as a historical example, however mythical, to argue that different environments produced different social structures. For him, they were evidence that laws and customs were not universal but were shaped by circumstance, a direct challenge to the rigid hierarchies of the old regime. This period also saw the legend collide explosively with the age of exploration. European explorers, armed with the classical myths they had learned from these very texts, journeyed to the Americas and believed they saw the legends come to life. When the Spanish conquistador Francisco de Orellana ventured down the massive South American river in 1541, he reported fierce battles with tribes of female warriors. With the image of the Amazons fresh in his mind, he named the river the Amazon in their honor. Similarly, rumors swirled around the Caribbean and North America of matrilineal tribes and women who fought alongside men. In nearly every case, these were misunderstandings or exaggerations of the complex social structures of indigenous peoples, but they reveal a powerful truth: the human mind is a prisoner of its stories. These explorers were not seeing what was truly in front of them. They were seeing what the ancient Greeks had taught them to see, projecting a 2,000-year-old myth onto a new world. This Enlightenment reinterpretation, for all its rational inquiry, was far from objective. The debates often carried the deep-seated biases of the era. Some thinkers used the Amazons to argue for a more egalitarian view of women's capabilities, suggesting that if such women could exist in myth or in reports from abroad, then perhaps gender roles were more flexible than previously thought. Others, however, used them to reinforce patriarchal views, dismissing the entire concept as an absurd impossibility against the laws of nature, and using twisted logic to argue that the very existence of such a society would be a violation of natural law. The Amazon had become a Rorschach test. What philosophers saw in her said more about their own preconceptions than about any historical reality. Yet this fervent debate, for the first time, began to apply a form of critical analysis to the legend, questioning its plausibility and its meaning. This shift from pure storytelling to a more empirical, though flawed, investigation was a crucial turning point. It began the process of moving the Amazons out of the realm of pure myth and into the emerging fields of history, anthropology, and archaeology, setting the stage for the rigorous academic scrutiny that would eventually uncover the real warrior women lying silent beneath the earth. So how do modern scholars untangle this intricate web of myth, history, and cultural bias to get closer to the truth about the Amazons? The answer lies in a powerful interdisciplinary approach, a fusion of methods that would have been unimaginable to researchers just a few decades ago. Today's historians no longer work in isolation, solely poring over ancient texts. Instead, they collaborate closely with archaeologists, anthropologists, geneticists, and specialists in gender studies, creating a much more holistic and nuanced picture. This collaborative effort allows them to treat the Amazon phenomenon not as a single puzzle to be solved, but as a multifaceted prism, with each discipline shining a light on a different facet. By weaving together these diverse strands of evidence, they can acknowledge that the Amazons are simultaneously a powerful myth, a reflection of real historical encounters, and a profound projection of ancient anxieties without having to choose just one explanation. A crucial part of this modern methodology is a much more critical and clear-eyed reading of the ancient sources. Scholars now approach the works of Herodotus, Diodorus, and others not as straightforward historical records, but as complex texts laden with cultural baggage. They ask new questions of these old writings. Who was the author's intended audience? What were his political or social goals? What unspoken assumptions about gender and barbarians shaped his narrative? This process, often called deconstruction, allows historians to identify and filter out the heavy layers of Greek bias. They can then extract the potential kernels of truth, like the descriptions of Scythian customs from the fantastical elaborations, such as the tales of annual mating rituals or breast removal. This isn't about dismissing the ancient authors, but about understanding them within their own context, and thereby reading their accounts more intelligently. This critical textual analysis is then placed in a dynamic conversation with the flood of new data emerging from the ground. Every new Kurgan excavation, every DNA analysis of a skeleton, and every forensic study of weapon-related trauma provides a tangible check against the ancient stories. Archaeology moves from a supporting role to a lead voice in the debate. For instance, when a grave is found containing a female skeleton with a battle axe injury to the skull, it forces a reinterpretation of a passage in Homer that might have previously been read as pure poetic license. The artifacts don't lie. They offer silent but undeniable testimony to a way of life, allowing scholars to move beyond what the Greeks said about these women to what we can actually see about how they lived and died. This evidence grounds the myth in a physical reality, transforming the Amazons from a purely literary concept into a historical one inspired by observable reality. This interdisciplinary lens has opened up fascinating new avenues of research that go beyond the simple question of, did they exist? Scholars are now deeply exploring how the Amazons were represented in art, analyzing thousands of vase paintings and sculptures not just for their beauty, but for what they reveal about Greek society itself. The consistent depiction of Amazons in foreign attire, like trousers and Phrygian caps, is studied as a deliberate visual strategy to reinforce their identity as the other. Furthermore, academics are placing the Amazons in a global context, comparing them to other traditions of warrior women from around the world, from the fierce honor musha of Japan to the Dahomey Amazons of West Africa. These comparisons are incredibly revealing. showing that the idea of women excelling in combat is not a unique Greek fantasy, but a recurring historical phenomenon that emerges under specific social and environmental conditions, particularly in nomadic or highly militarized cultures. The ultimate goal of this rigorous modern scholarship is not to kill the magic of the myth by reducing it to a dry academic footnote, quite the opposite. By carefully separating the verifiable history from the powerful fiction, scholars actually enhance our appreciation for the legend's enduring power. They show us that the real story is in many ways more impressive than the pure fantasy. We learn that there were indeed women who mastered the bow and horse, who fought and led, not as exceptions in a man-hating tribe, but as valued members of their own nomadic societies. Understanding this truth allows us to see the ancient Greek imagination not as a mere inventor of tall tales, but as a brilliant amplifier that took a fascinating reality and transformed it into a timeless archetype. This scholarly perspective doesn't diminish the Amazons, it grants them a new kind of immortality, one rooted in both bone and story, inviting us to reflect on why this figure continues to resonate so deeply and what she still has to teach us about our own world. Perhaps the most profound lesson the Amazons offer is a masterclass in the power and peril of storytelling itself. For centuries, their narrative was controlled not by themselves, but by the Greek men who wrote about them, a stark reminder that history is often shaped by the voices in power. Their myth was filtered through a lens of fear, fascination, and a need to reinforce a specific social order. This distortion shows us how easily the reality of powerful figures can be simplified into symbolic tales that serve a cultural agenda. Today, this pushes us to ask a critical question: whose stories are we still not hearing? The Amazons teach us to be vigilant readers of history, to look for the silences and the gaps, and to understand that every legend might be obscuring a far more complex and interesting truth. It's a call to seek out the primary sources, to listen for the marginalized voices, and to be conscious of the narratives we choose to amplify in our own time. This directly connects to a vital contemporary issue: the representation of women in our historical record. For too long, the incredible archaeological evidence of real warrior women was ignored or explained away because it didn't fit the established patriarchal narrative. Skeletons buried with weapons were automatically assumed to be male, their stories literally buried by bias. The rediscovery of these women forces a dramatic rewrite of history, proving that women's roles were far more diverse and powerful than many textbooks have acknowledged. The Amazons, both as myth and as historical inspiration, challenge us to re-examine the past with fresh eyes. They urge us to question the assumptions that have sidelined female experiences and to actively celebrate the multitude of ways women have exercised power, leadership, and strength throughout time. This isn't about rewriting history to be politically correct. It's about correcting the historical record to be accurate, giving credit where it has long been denied. In our modern discourse on gender equality, the Amazon archetype has been powerfully reclaimed as a symbol of agency and unapologetic strength. Movements empowering women to embrace their physical power, ambition, and leadership often draw on this imagery. The term Amazon itself is now used positively to describe tall, athletic, or assertively powerful women. This reclamation is significant because it takes a figure once used to terrify a patriarchal society and transforms her into an icon of inspiration. She represents the possibility of a world where female strength isn't just accepted but is normalized and celebrated. However, the legend also offers a crucial cautionary note against creating new, equally restrictive stereotypes. The goal shouldn't be to simply replace the ideal of a passive woman with that of an invincible warrior woman. The real Scythian women show us a more nuanced path, They were warriors who also wore jewelry, who were mothers, leaders, and craftswomen. They embody a complete humanity, not a one-dimensional ideal. The lesson is to strive for a world where all forms of femininity are valued and where women have the agency to define strength on their own terms. Ultimately, the enduring mystery of the Amazons is their greatest gift to us. They refuse to be pinned down completely, forever hovering between history and myth, between fact and symbol. This ambiguity is what keeps them alive and relevant, compelling each generation to engage with them anew. They are a perpetual question mark in our past, challenging our certitudes and inviting us to keep searching, keep questioning, and keep imagining. The work of understanding them is never truly finished. With every new archaeological discovery and every fresh scholarly interpretation, our picture becomes a little clearer, yet the mystery deepens. They remind us that the past is not a closed book but an ongoing conversation, a dynamic puzzle that we are still piecing together. This continuous engagement with the unknown ensures that the Amazons will continue to captivate, inspire, and challenge us for centuries to come, their legacy eternally evolving just beyond our grasp. Despite the incredible strides we've made in understanding the Amazons, the dust is far from settled. In fact, the more we uncover, the more complex and intriguing the mystery becomes. One of the most profound unanswered questions is one of scale and influence. We now know that warrior women existed among the nomadic cultures of the steppes, but to what extent did their reality directly fuel the specific, elaborate myths of the Greeks? Was it a single, dramatic encounter between a Greek trading party and a band of Sarmatian female archers that sparked the legend? Or was it a slower process built on generations of travelers' tales, rumors, and half-understood observations that gradually coalesced into the story of Themyscira? We may never know the exact catalyst, the specific moment when observation blossomed into full-blown mythology, and that gap between a verifiable fact and the birth of a legend remains a tantalizing void. The archaeological record itself, while providing undeniable proof, continues to generate as many questions as it answers. Each new Kurgan excavation holds the potential to upend our previous assumptions. For instance, just how widespread was the practice of female warfare within these ancient nomadic societies? Was it a common occurrence with a significant portion of the female population trained in archery and combat? Or was it an elite status reserved for a small number of noblewomen or chieftains' daughters? The graves we find could represent the exceptional, not the commonplace. Furthermore, can we trace the evolution of this role over time? Did the importance of female warriors increase during periods of intense conflict or migration? These are questions that only more discoveries and more sophisticated analysis of existing finds can hope to address, reminding us that the past is not a static picture but a dynamic story still being written bone by bone, artifact by artifact. Scholars also grapple with the challenge of interpreting the conflicting ancient sources without the trap of imposing modern viewpoints. The writings of Herodotus, Hippocrates, and Diodorus Siculus often contradict each other, and each author had his own agenda, biases, and sources of dubious reliability. How do we weigh one account against another? Do we privilege the more sensational stories, which might contain a grain of truth wrapped in exaggeration, or the drier, more factual-sounding accounts that could be just as biased in their own way? The biggest challenge is avoiding the temptation to project our contemporary values onto these ancient texts. It's easy to want to see the Amazons as proto-feminist icons, but that is a modern lens. The Greeks certainly didn't view them that way. Navigating this requires a delicate balance of respecting the ancient perspective while also critically deconstructing it to find the historical reality hidden within. This sense of ongoing mystery is precisely what makes the study of the Amazon so thrilling and dynamic. It is a field that refuses to be closed, a puzzle that rewards every solved piece with two new ones. The enigma of these warrior women ensures that their story is never truly finished. It invites each new generation of historians, archaeologists, and enthusiasts to bring their own questions, their own technologies, and their own perspectives to the table. This enduring power to captivate and provoke thought, to resist a single, neat explanation, is the true hallmark of a legendary legacy. It confirms that the Amazons are more than a historical footnote or a simple myth. They are a perpetual conversation between the past and the present, a conversation that continues to reveal new depths about them, and in doing so, reveals new depths about ourselves. They stand at the crossroads of myth and history, a powerful echo from the ancient world that refuses to fade. The Amazons are far more than just a story. They are a testament to humanity's deep and enduring fascination with powerful women and the very idea of an alternative society. From their fiery birth in the epic poems of Homer to their modern-day reincarnation as superheroes and feminist icons, they have consistently challenged us to rethink everything we thought we knew about gender, power, and the cultural narratives that shape our world. While the spade of the archaeologist has undeniably confirmed that the warrior women who inspired these tales were very real, the Amazons themselves remain a magnificent legendary construct, one that continues to inspire, to provoke, and to force us to look inward. Their enduring legacy teaches us a profound lesson about the nature of history itself. It is not merely a record of facts, but a tapestry woven from the stories we choose to tell, the stories we choose to believe, and the stories we use to define ourselves against the other. For centuries, the Amazons were a story told by Greek men to reinforce their own societal values. Today, we are actively engaged in questioning those very stories, peeling back the layers of bias to uncover a richer, more complex truth. This process of re-examination isn't about discarding the past. It's about honoring it by striving for a more complete and honest understanding, one that gives voice to those who were previously silenced by the narratives of the powerful. As we bring this exploration to a close, we leave you with a question to ponder. How does the dual legacy of the Amazons, both as a documented historical reality and as a powerful cultural symbol, influence your own view of strength, equality, and the potential for human societies? What does their story, in all its complexity, say to you? We invite you to share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. The conversation is a vital part of keeping this incredible history alive. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the truths and myths surrounding antiquity's most enigmatic and compelling warrior women.